Hello, sir. Good evening, sir.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon. Nice to have you here. All right, we are good to go. Let me start. So I think people have joined. People will join sometime. Just share the screen for someone. Let me join. Okay, hope it is visible, right? Audible? Can
Yeah,
someone come?
visible as well as audible. No problem.
Yeah. So, good evening, everyone, and good morning from whoever is in the West in US. And happy to have you here. This is part of our Parental Alienation Month special program. We have been doing it for quite some time, and we, along with a few other bodies, we're trying to bring a law reformation in due course, and we want to create awareness. And we've been inviting various experts across the country. This time, we have one of the, uh, I can say, one among the big experts. I can say one expert who's been giving a lot of inputs in this field of parental alienation, Dr. William Bernet, and he has kindly approved our request to be a part of this program. And to chair the session, we're having Dr. T.S. Rao, who's a, who's the current president of the Indian Psychiatric Society. For us, he doesn't need any introduction, but for this program, I'm going to introduce him. I'm going to start the program now. First, let me introduce the chair for the session, Dr. T.S. Rao, sir. He's president of Indian Psychiatric Society. He's a professor emeritus in psychiatry, and he is a coordinator in psychosocial medicine from the Department of Psychiatry, Jesus College, Mysore. He has been in the past position in the IPA Society. He's the current editor of the Journal of Psychosocial Health. He's president of SASM, and he is a former president of Indian Association of Geriatric Mental Health. He's a co-chair of Psychiatric and Human Sexuality section, and he's a former editor of the Indian Journal of Psychiatry. He has various publications on his domain. He's done his PhD, and to his feathers, he is having Dr. D.L. Murthy Rao, our oration, C. Raman Distinguished Award, Oration Scientist Award, the Acharya Award, and he's also holding the president of the Karnataka Psychiatric Society. Dr. T.S. Rao, sir, welcome, sir. Amidst the busy schedule, you have agreed for starting the session, and we are a pleasure to have you here, sir. So let me introduce today's speaker, Dr. William Bernet, who's one of the founding presidents of the Parental Alienation Study Group. PA is one of the key bodies who has been giving a lot of medical inputs in the field of parental alienation, and they are still striving to fight that parental alienation is not a myth; it is a medical condition. From the academic point, he is a professor emeritus from the Vanderbilt University of Medicine, Nashville, Tennessee, USA. He's an expert in field of forensic psychiatry. Apart from being a general psychiatrist and psychiatrist, he has testified over 300 times in 24 states as an expert witness in the forensic psychiatry. He's author, he's editor, and a thought leader. Among the various books, one of the books is called as Children of Divorce, a practical guide for parents, therapists, attorneys, and judges, with Judge John Ash. And he has been editor in the parental alienation section of DSM-5 and ICD-11. And he's a co-editor for various books. And he's editor for the parental alienation theory, the official synopsis of the year 2025. And his area of expert, of course, is parental alienation, child custody, and high conflict divorce, and the interface of mental health and law. And it's an honor and pleasure to have one of the eminent speakers in the field of parental alienation. I'm going to give the stage to Professor T.S. Rao, sir, to introduce the session and start the session, sir. Please, sir. Rao, sir, you are there? You can talk.
Okay, sorry, it was muted. Good afternoon to all from India, and good morning to my friends from abroad. And it is a wonderful occasion for me to share this session because I believe this is one of the very important topic. Approximately about 2 months ago, we had a similar session speaking on developmental issues, how it affects. And today we'll be trying to look into all the developments that have happened. Initially, Alan Gartner, 1985, what he coined the terminology. Subsequently, in the West, maybe this is one of the very, very common and problematic area. In India, we at one particular time believed that divorces are less. But I worked in South Karnataka, where we are inching towards divorce rates as big as Western country. Automatically, this brings in so many conflicts, and the two people involved, how they handle it and how they succeed in mitigating the problems of a child. Of course, in the process, how best we can be of a source of strength for children should be for one of our goals, and that means we need to work on this. I'm here to learn, and I request Dr. William Bernet to start the session and make us understand and throw the light on various aspects. Welcome to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rao. And thank you, Natash Prabhu, for inviting me to be part of this discussion today. So I know I'm already started, so I'm assuming that you can hear me and you can see me.
Yes,
Yes, Dr. William, we can hear you and we can see you.
That's great. Thank you very much. So here, so here I am. So I'm Bill Bernet. I'm a child psychiatrist in Nashville, Tennessee, in the United States. And I've been asked to talk about two topics today: the clinical understanding of parental alienation and the child impact. So this is how I'm dividing up the time. I'm going to talk about the clinical understanding by describing and discussing the 5-factor model for the diagnosis of parental alienation, and that'll take about half the time. And then when I talk about the child impact, I'm going to do something a little bit unusual. I'm not going to give you any statistics or any vignettes. I'm going to talk to you about artwork that's done by children of divorced parents and alienated children. And this artwork is very powerful, and it conveys how children are affected by parental alienation. So each part is going to be about 40 minutes or so, and I'm going to leave some time after the first part and after the second part so we can have some discussion and questions. So I usually like to start to make sure everybody is on the same page with these definitions. And this is our definition of parental alienation itself: a child who allies strongly with one parent and rejects a relationship with the other parent without a good reason. And two parts of this definition that are important is this usually happens in the context of a high conflict separation or divorce, but it doesn't have to. In other words, even when a family is still together in the same household, it's possible for one parent, if he or she is determined, to alienate the child away from the other parent. So that it doesn't always have to be after the divorce has happened. And the other thing, of course, in the definition of alienation is it is without a good reason. So some people like these diagrams. And in this diagram, the favored parent and the alienated parent are blaming each other for the problems that the child is having. And the child is avoiding the alienated parent. That's this yellow squiggle here is the parental alienation. And then this big red line are alienating behaviors. And just to be clear about the distinction, PA refers to the mental condition of the child. And also it could, the relationship between the child and the rejected parent. and alienating behaviors refer to the activities of the favored parent. Now, I realize that not everybody has these definitions and not everybody uses the same terms. But just so that in this group today, this afternoon, we're all saying the same thing. These are the definitions. PA refers to the condition of the child. ABs refer to the activities of the parent. And so as a result, there are three people involved. The alienating parent is the person who's doing the indoctrinating. The alienated parent is the person who's being rejected. And the alienated child, of course, is the person caught in the middle. And one other distinction, while we're talking about definitions, is alienation, of course, is what I've just been talking about, when it's not for a good reason. And estrangement is when a child rejects a parent for a good reason, such as a history of abuse or neglect. And, you know, you can have one or the other, or in some families, you can have both of those things happening at the same time. And that's called a hybrid case, where the contact refusal is from multiple causes acting at the same time. So I just wanted to make sure that we're all using the same definitions for these terms, for this situation. So most of my time here, I want to talk about the Baker 5-factor model for the diagnosis of parental alienation. It's called the Baker 5-factor model because Amy Baker, a psychologist here in the United States, first got this idea off the ground, and she described a 4-factor model. And then later we added something and we made it the 5-factor model. And this is the paper that was published a few years ago. This is in an important journal, the Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. And basically, I'm going to be summarizing this paper as I go forward here in this presentation. Natosh has this paper, and he's going to distribute it to everybody, or whoever wants it, after I finish here. So let me walk you through this particular paper. So it's a 5-factor model. Here are the 5 factors. The child manifests contact refusal. In other words, the child says, I don't want to go see mom or dad. Nevertheless, the child had a prior positive relationship with the rejected parent. There's absence of abuse, neglect, or deficient parenting. In other words, if abuse or neglect was present, it wouldn't be alienation, it would be estrangement. Fourth are alienating behaviors by the preferred parent. And fifth are behavioral manifestations in the child. So I want to point out, of these 5 factors, all 3 people are represented here. The alienating parent is represented in factor 4. The alienated parent is represented in factor 2 and 3, the previous good relationship and the absence of abuse. And the child is represented in factors 1 and 5. So this has been published in several different places, and I think a lot of people are adopting the 5-factor model for how to diagnose PA. So let's go through. I want to talk about how do you actually size up each of these 5 factors. So as I said, the first one is the child says, I don't want to go. The child manifests contact refusal. And how do you know that? Well, it's usually obvious that this is what the child says, and not only at the time of visitation, but the child says it to everybody else. It says to one parent, to the other parent, to his therapist, to the judge even. So the child is pretty outspoken. So usually the mom and dad agree, and the attorneys agree that contact refusal is happening. But I have to give you a little footnote here, and that we use this factor 1 to establish the severity of the parental alienation. In other words, we say that PA can be mild, moderate, and severe, and we wanted to have a very simple way to make those distinctions. I know some people have written whole chapters on how to do this, but in order to make this definition work easily, we want to have a very simple way for mild, moderate, and severe. So this is what mild means. The child says, I don't want to go see dad or the other parent, but the child goes and has a good time. In other words, when the child is with a therapist or the child is with the alienating parent, the child might complain about going to see the other parent, but the child goes and has a good time and is fine. So that's mild. Moderate is the child complains about going, and once he gets to the other home, he's typically he's both oppositional some of the time and cooperative some of the time. So it's not he's not fixed all the way, and there will be moments or even hours when he's pleasant and has dinner and is cooperative with the alienated parent, although basically he says he doesn't want to be there. That's moderate. Severe is obviously more obvious. The child refuses adamantly to see the rejected parent and threatens to run away and so on. And some, you know, the child hasn't been there for months or years. Now, I will say that there are situations where in severe cases, the child does go to visit that parent. But during that time, the child is persistently oppositional. In other words, the child will go to her room, will stay on her cell phone to the mother. She'll avoid the dad. She won't have dinner with the dad. She'll say the dad is poisoning her food. And so during the entire time, the alienated child in severe cases is oppositional. So I find that this distinction is helpful, mild, moderate, and severe, because that determines the intervention. There are a number of different interventions for parental alienation, and whether it's mild, moderate, severe is what determines the appropriate intervention. And also, this is going to come up later in my presentation because I told you I'm going to show you some pictures that are drawn by alienated children. And in the pictures, I distinguish as to whether the child is mild, moderate, or severe. So let's move on to factor 2, which is the child had a prior positive relationship with the parent who's now rejected. So how do we know that? Usually it's up to the rejected parent to prove this. And he does this, he or she does this by looking at photographs and videos and diaries. You talk to other people, you talk to family members, other people who know the child, occasionally a therapist. A therapist will say, oh, during all this period of time, the child was very positive with both parents, and now suddenly at a particular time in the therapy, the child changed to being oppositional. The third factor, as I've said, is you have to be able to show that there was no previous abuse or neglect or highly deficient parenting by the rejected parent. Well, how do you know that? Well, you interview the mom and dad, of course, and get details to see whether they describe domestic violence or any other issue that might be considered a reason for the child to reject the parent. You collect information from collaterals, meaning other family members or even neighbors, medical people, child protection people, and so on. So another way to word this, the wording, the absence of abuse, is wording something in a negative way. And so sometimes it's kind of hard to prove something that's negative. So I think sometimes it's better to word it in a more, in a kind of in a positive way and say it like what I have written here. For factor 3, the child's rejection, if the child rejection is far out of proportion to anything that parent has done. You know, so the rejected parent isn't perfect. He or she has probably done some things that are not perfect parenting, but the child's rejection is way out of proportion to anything that the parent has actually done. So that's number 3. Number 4 of these of the 5-factor model has to do with the activities of the alienating parent. So these are the alienating behaviors, or the ABs. And Amy Baker has published on these and other people, and there are 17 common, that alienating behaviors that have been recognized. So let's go down this list. I'm going to point out the ones that are perhaps most common and most important. The very first one on this list is that the alienating parent denigrates and criticizes the other parent and limits contact with the other parent. Here are some more. It says here on this list, allowing the child to choose between his or her parents. Well, that's very common. And the alienating parent says, well, you know, I'm just looking after what the child wants. You know, Jimmy is 9 years old, so he should be allowed to choose. You know, it's his weekend. He should be allowed to choose between staying here with me or going visit the other parent. Well, you're not supposed to do that. That's a very good example of an alienating behavior, even though it's done in a somewhat indirect way. In other words, parent A is not saying that parent B is a bad person, but the parent A is conveying that by saying, well, you can go if you want to, but if you want to stay here, you can stay here. And then the next one is more blatant, creating the impression that the other parent is dangerous. So there are a lot of ways to do that. It's usually done in a somewhat indirect way. For instance, the child is going to see the dad, and the mom will say, well, honey, I hope you have a good weekend, but if your dad does anything that bothers you or makes you feel uncomfortable, you can call 911. Well, as you probably know, 911 is the phone number, the 3-digit phone number in the United States for an emergency. And if you call 911, you get the police and they come to your house. And so if the mother says that, you can call 911 if dad bothers you. And the mother is obviously conveying that the dad is a dangerous person. So these are all the different alienating behaviors. There are a few more. Asking the child to spy on the other parent is kind of interesting. Keep secrets from the other parent. Instead of calling the other parent mom or dad, they refer to the other parent by their first name, which is a way to demean or denigrate the other parent. And a couple more, changing the child's name. For instance, you take away the dad's name and put maybe the mom's last name as the name of the child. And so here are a couple more. So anyway, these 17 behaviors were identified a number of years ago by Amy Baker, but you know, there are many, many different behaviors. There's a chapter in one of our books that has, I think it has 200 possible alienating behaviors in different categories. So obviously there are many, many different ways a parent might directly or indirectly alienate the child. So that factor has to do with the preferred parent. Factor 5 has to do with the manifestations in the child. And there are 8 of them. These are the same manifestations that Richard Gardner described way back when parental alienation syndrome was identified in 1985. And each of these is important. So the first one is the campaign of denigration. That's where the child repeats over and over again to everybody he can find, I don't want to go see dad, dad is mean, dad is not nice to me, dad does bad things, and so on. And the idea is the campaign is that there's a list. And for instance, a child came, I saw a child, and the boy came in, and the first thing he said was, oh, Dr. Bernet, let me tell you the things that dad has been doing. And that's a campaign, because the child is initiating telling a list of faults of dad. Weak, frivolous means that the things that are listed are silly or sometimes they're preposterous because they're so bad. Like dad took me on an airplane and threatened to throw me out, you know, is pretty preposterous. Or sometimes they're frivolous. One girl who was maybe 12 or 13 went to visit her dad, and she came back and she told me that she never wanted to go there again, even though she had been going fairly regularly to see her dad. And I said, okay, well, what about it? You know, how come? And she said, well, my dad did a terrible thing, which was my dad decorated my room in a way that I didn't like. Well, that's pretty silly. That's frivolous. And so that's a good example of the kind of things that these children come up with when they try to explain why they don't go see the other parent. Lack of ambivalence is important for a couple of reasons. One is because many, many people have described this, not just Gardner, but many people. And secondly, it's easy to measure. Of all these things, you can measure lack of ambivalence. Another name for that is splitting. And that's when the child says one parent is all totally good and the other parent is totally bad. Or in one case, the child said, my mother is my angel, my dad is a devil. So that's splitting. And that's, you know, is a psychological phenomenon that occurs in other psychiatric conditions. And you can actually measure this. There's a test that I use in some research in which we measured the child's opinion of both parents. And in severe alienation, one parent is totally has an extremely low score, and the other parent has an extremely high score. So you can do research and measure lack of ambivalence. Sometimes the independent thinker phenomenon needs some explanation. It's in quotes because the child says that he's an independent thinker, but he really isn't. And this is where the child comes into an appointment and says, oh, Dr. Bernet, by the way, nobody has told me to say these things about mom or about dad. These are all my own ideas. Nobody has tried to talk me into this. And so it's pretty clear that the child was influenced, but is claiming otherwise. So there are four more. These are the things that Richard Gardner described in 1985, and they're still legitimate signs of parental alienation. Here's another one. Reflexive support means that, like in a family meeting, the child, if the topic comes up, the child will automatically say, oh, dad's right about that. And mom doesn't know what she's talking about. In other words, the child will immediately take sides with one parent or the other. Absence of guilt means that the child is very rude or hostile or even cruel, but it doesn't bother the child. The child is oblivious to how serious that is. Borrowed scenarios means that the parent will come in and say something to me, the evaluator, whoever, you know, something complaining about something dad does. And then the child will come in and say the very same thing using the same language. And finally, animosity for the extended family. So that means that the child will not just reject the parent, but will also reject the aunts and uncles and grandparents. Now, by the way, some of these don't show up in general life, or they don't show up to the parents. These 8 signs were originally identified by Gardner as something that he would see in an evaluation. For instance, back here, this, the independent thinker phenomenon would hardly ever come up with the mom or the dad, but that's the kind of thing that the child is going to bring up with the evaluator. Or the borrowed scenarios. That's something that typically comes up with the evaluator. So that's kind of good to be aware of, because parents don't always describe all 8 of these signs of alienation. So in really severe cases, they're all present, or maybe 7 or 8 of them are present. And these have been discussed now since 1980, for 40 years, since 1985. And so most people, at least people who are proponents of PA theory, parental alienation theory, agree that these 8 symptoms or 8 signs are important. So in severe cases, you're going to have 7 or 8 of them. In less severe cases, like I said, mild, moderate, and severe. In mild cases, you may only have 1 or 2 of these. In moderate, you might have 4 or 5. In severe cases, you're going to have 7 or 8 of these 8 signs. So here's an interesting sequence that sometimes happens, especially in more severe cases, that the child starts out by making false statements. In other words, the child will say, Daddy doesn't care about me because when we were driving to the movies, he was drinking a beer. In other words, that's something that's not true. The child has that idea and is making that up. It's a false statement. So if that goes on for a while, the child will start to actually believe, will sincerely believe that Daddy was drinking a beer in the car. And if that goes on, sometimes children develop false memories. That's a very dramatic thing. When a child comes in and relates something happened and details and so on, and the child is sincere in relating this, and it never happened. So false memories sometimes occur. And the evaluator can sometimes disprove by collecting objective information that whatever the child is describing never happened. So here's an interesting thing to think about. I said there are 5 factors. Now, sometimes it's stated too strongly and people say, oh, you absolutely have to have all 5 factors in order to diagnose parental alienation. But I want you to think about something. Is that really necessary? Is it possible to have alienation without having all 5 factors? So for instance, factor 2 was prior positive relationship. But suppose a situation where a baby is born and the mother takes possession of the baby and totally controls access to the baby. So the dad never does anything. The dad doesn't get to feed the baby or play with the baby, or hold the baby, or put the baby to bed. So in that case, the dad does become alienated from the baby, and even as the baby grows up. And it's an example where you might not have factor 2 because the dad never had an opportunity to form a relationship with this child. But I think it's still okay to call that parental alienation. Or what about factor 3? Is the absence of abuse and neglect? Well, I think in some situations there is a history of abuse and neglect. And the typical thing is there might have been some situation of domestic violence many years ago, a long time ago. And after that, the parents reconcile and the parents are perfectly happy and have a perfectly satisfying relationship with each other. So there is a history of domestic violence, but it's so long ago that the parents forgot about it until now. And now one parent, like the mom, might bring this up over and over again. She digs up something from the past. So in fact, you'll see that there is a history, but it still is part of the parental alienation picture. I've been generally saying that mom is the alienating parent and dad is the victim. And of course, it can be either way. It can be either way around. Some statistics have about half and half, about half mom being the alienating parent and about half the dad. So that's what I wanted to say about the first part here, the definitions and the 5-factor model. So we have a few minutes and maybe Dr. Prabhu could orchestrate this, but if there's somebody who has a question, or maybe if a question was posed in the chat, or somebody has a comment, maybe that's something we can do now for a few minutes.
Right now, there are no questions, Dr. William. You can proceed. Maybe in the end, we can have a Q&A, open stage Q&A.
That's okay.
Thank you.
That's fine. So I want to do something here. I told you I want to show you some artwork. Usually when people talk about how is the child affected, what they want to do is they want to give little vignettes. Here's a vignette of a case, and this is what happened. And this is how the child became unhappy and depressed and anxious and so on. But I've been collecting these pictures of alienated children, and they're very dramatic. And I think that they convey what the child is feeling and thinking when they're caught up in these situations. So the pictures are organized mild, moderate, and severe. And so I already gave you these definitions, which what's in front right now are the very same definitions that I went over a few minutes ago. But they're going to come up as I tell you about these pictures. But think about it. If any of it, you have a question or a comment, we're going to have a few minutes at the end to do that. So let's start with mild. These are a couple of pictures of mild parental alienation. But first, here's a little video. So that's just a little tiny introduction. So here's a picture by a girl. It's very sweet. That's her with the dad, and it says on it, "To Dad with love." So that's kind of nice. This was a normal picture when they had a good relationship. And then a couple of years later, she becomes alienated from her dad. And this is a drawing by the same girl. In other words, this is one drawing. This is by the same girl. And this is a somewhat disturbing picture. In fact, she says, "I'm ugly," to describe this picture of herself. So that's just an example of how when children become alienated, they develop different kinds of internalizations that might be somewhat disturbing. And she says, "I'm ugly." So this is another child. This is a little boy, also in having mild alienation. And I'll try to explain what's going on here. You can see the picture of the little boy here towards the right-hand side of the picture, and he's running, and it's to his house, and these are raindrops. Now, just sort of by footnote, the raindrops are interesting because I've had other kids who draw raindrops, and they seem to signify tears, that they signify weeping or crying. It's hard to tell exactly. But in the little squiggle in the bottom, see, there's a line that goes from the roof down to this squiggle. I think that's a puddle. I think that the kid is drawing a rainstorm, and the rain is creating a little puddle in the yard. But anyway, this is what he said. He said, "I'm running home scared and frightened. I'm feeling very alone and sad that the beautiful day turned into a roaring storm." So I know from external, I know from the parent, that when he drew this, he was mildly alienated from one of the parents. This is another example of a 6-year-old boy who at the time, I know from other information, that he was mildly alienated. Now, what's interesting about this picture, this boy was coming to see me for an appointment first thing in the morning. And on the way to my office, they stopped, his uncle was bringing him. They stopped at a restaurant, and he took the placemat of the restaurant and turned it over, and he drew this elaborate picture of warfare. I mean, there are air warplanes and a tank and armored vehicles and even a little ambulance. So nobody asked him, nobody instigated that drawing, but he spontaneously drew this in a restaurant. So he then comes to the appointment, and we have the appointment. At the very end, he says, "Dr. Bernet, can I draw a picture?" And of course, what do I say? Of course, I say, "Of course." And this is a picture he draws. And it's similar, except it's much briefer. And this only has a warship and an airplane. And he says, "I'm drawing my favorite thing. It's a war." Now, he described this a little bit. He said that he himself was in the airplane, the fighter jet, it looks like, and his dad is in the boat, and that his mom is off and they're having a battle with the mom. So that's a pretty dramatic, more or less spontaneous picture by a little boy who's conveying what it's like to be caught between these two parents. Now, before I go on, I want to point out something really important. I told you in the pictures I just showed you that the child had mild parental alienation. I can't tell you that because of the pictures. In other words, if you ever do this kind of artwork, you can't use the artwork to diagnose parental alienation because, you know, in that one picture, the child was unhappy about running home. Well, he could have been unhappy for lots of different reasons other than alienation. Or angry. A child could be angry for many reasons. So the way I use these, I have information from other sources, from an evaluation or from a parent. So I know from outside information that the child is alienated and whether it's mild, moderate, or severe. So once I know that, it's interesting to see, well, this is the kind of thing this children thinks, the child thinks about or feels. I hope you follow this. I don't use it to diagnose alienation, but if I know the child is alienated, it's an interesting way, it's a somewhat dramatic way to try to understand how the child feels. So those are mild. I want to show you a few pictures of moderate parental alienation. So here's something by a little girl who is very talented, I think, in artwork. And this was done way back before she became alienated. So a number of these pictures are before and after. In other words, when the child has a normal relationship and then later, a few years later, they're alienated. And these pictures typically come from the parent. You know, parents save pictures drawn by their kids. And so parents donated these pictures to me and gave me permission to use them in this kind of presentation. But here, this was back when she was fine and she had a good relationship with her parents. She became alienated from her mother and a year or so later, and this is a picture that she drew in art class. This is actually for an 11-year-old. I mean, this seems like a bit very well done picture. And this is, you know, as you can see, this is based on Picasso. And, you know, she learned about Pablo Picasso in class, and she does this picture. And it's a picture of a female, and one half of the picture is very pleasant and happy and blue, the colored blue. And the other half is very, looks angry. And you can see the teeth and the eyes look angry and so on. So, that, I mean, I don't exactly know what this girl was thinking. I've never met this girl. But to me, this picture is conveys something very strong about a person being sometimes really nice and other times evil. Now, I knew from this girl's parent that she was, at this point in her life, she was moderately alienated from her mother. This is also moderate by a boy. And actually, this boy also studied art, just like the girl you just saw. And you can see this is a nicely done picture. It's kind of hard to tell exactly what it is, but it looks like a bonfire. It looks like a very large fire in a forest. And you know, I don't know exactly what this means to this child, but it suggests very strong emotions in a child who is known already to be moderately alienated from one of the parents. So to me, you know, obviously this doesn't diagnose anything, but to me, it helps to convey how this child is feeling. And by the way, if you were doing therapy with this child, and you know, and they were to draw a picture like this, or draw a picture like this, you would obviously have a conversation with the child. You know, tell me about your picture. How did you come to do this? And so on. So that's moderate. Most of the pictures I have have to do with severe alienation. This is a little video. So I need to tell you that in these severely alienated children, some of them are pretty disturbing. This particular one isn't particularly disturbing, but this is unusual. So I need to explain this. On the left-hand side of the picture is a family, parents and the kid who drew the picture. It says me. And there's a storm going on. There's lightning and rain and so on. So that seems like a somewhat unhappy setting. And then in the center are his stepbrother and stepsister. So actually, they're not stepbrothers. It's his half brother and half sister, and they're going back to their real dad. It says on the other side, their real dad, and that apparently is a happy house. I'm not sure why one house is sad and one is happy, but the child is describing what it's like being in a household where somebody is alienated. Here's another example. This is a little girl, and this is perfectly normal, friendly. It says, to mom, love, and so on. And that's a nice picture of a girl having a nice relationship with her mom. And this is also, I love you, mom. So this is all normal. These are all very nice. Well, what happened later? This is a couple of years later. The girl is severely alienated. And you can read these. It says, go away. You don't belong in this world or house. No one has loved you. No one can ever or ever has loved you. So obviously, I'm trying to convey here that children who are alienated have really very strong, and I guess you would even call them hateful feelings about the rejected parent. These are not normal things for a child to write down or to say about a parent. And you can see how originally the prior relationship was perfectly nice, and now it's very, very negative. So obviously, I'm trying to show you the before and after. This is another one. I got to warn you, this is a little disturbing. I'm going to go through this with you. But and this is the before, and then there's an after. And these are all different children. But I have to warn you that what they're disturbing, unhappy pictures, some of these, and this is an example. But it starts out normal. This is a girl to her dad. Dear Dad, there is only one person in the world to be my daddy, and that is you. Love you, loads, so on. And see under the word daddy, it says drum roll. I thought that was kind of cute, that the child is indicating that when she writes this, there's supposed to be a drum roll to emphasize her message. Well, here I've given you a warning because the next picture is the following. Same girl, a couple of years later, severely alienated. She's saying unsincerely me, and she's holding a sword, and she's cutting off her dad's head. It says you, head unattached. I got this from the dad. The father had saved this for several years and so on. But obviously, we're trying to show you before alienation, perfectly normal, happy child, and after alienation, extremely negative. Just to say something that's obviously, this is not a normal picture by a child. This is an extremely abnormal picture. And obviously, if you were a therapist and you had this picture and the child, and you would have a discussion about what's going on in this picture and how this feeling this angry feeling came about and where it came from. So as you know, we're on severe parental alienation. Here's another example. You know, back when I was telling you the 8 signs of alienation, one of them was lack of ambivalence or splitting. So here's a wonderful page in which a girl wrote these words over and over again on this page. And it's an amazing, spontaneous manifestation of splitting, because this page is addressed to her mother. And to her mother, she says, I hate mom. I won't call you mom anymore. I only love dad. Stop something. You're not my stupid mom. Something like that. I hate you. I hate you. I hate you. About 20 times. And then I love dad. I love dad. And so on. I really have no idea what prompted her to go to the trouble to write this. But we do know at the time she was severely alienated from her mother. And she is displaying here a cardinal feature of alienation, which is lack of ambivalence. It is interesting that this artwork done by children is just amazing. How the artwork is consistent with what we know about parental alienation. So this is slightly sad, I guess you could say. This has to do with the child and her aunt. At the top, this is sort of a little abstract drawing. And at the top, she says, my Zia. I think her aunt's name was Aunt Zia. And she's saying, my Zia is amazing. And then here's another one. My Zia is my shield. Maybe it's my Zia is a shield. I'm not really sure. Oh, yeah. So in any case, those are all, that's very sweet. It's very positive. Well, this girl became alienated from her mother and her aunt. And this is a little note that she has. This is the aunt trying to be friendly. The aunt says, sorry, missed your call. Ring me again if you need to. Love you. But here's the responses of this girl, which are extremely rude, at least. Pooh, fuck, you're a hippopotamus, and so on. It says, give me all your money or I will break your spine. So this is an extremely arrogant, hostile message to an aunt that previously had a wonderful relationship. Okay, this is another family, and this has a girl and her brother, and they're both severely alienated from her mother. And once again, I don't know what prompted the drawing. The mother had saved these and let me see them and let me use them. And the girl who's saying, excuse me, so angry I can kill. I don't really know what's going on in her mind, but I do know she was alienated from her mother. And she had a brother who's conveying the same idea, except in a different way. This is a drawing by a boy, and it talks at the very top. It says, rip Patrick's head off. Patrick was the mother's fiance, and the little boy has fantasies about murdering him. What does it say here? Ugly man can't look after himself without a lady like his mom or my mom. In other words, he's saying Patrick can't take care of himself and so on. And it says, I hate him. And it has the little boy shooting Patrick, which is pretty gruesome. So this is the same theme of extremely inappropriate, angry feelings, which are way, way, way out of proportion. to anything that you can imagine actually happened. Here's one more by a boy. Now, this is an interesting story because we had this picture that his mother had saved for several years. When he was 9, this boy drew this extremely disturbing picture of himself. Now, at the time, he was alienated from his mother and living with his dad. And he's saying, I hate my life. And this kind of stick figure is extremely inappropriate for a 9-year-old. And obviously the cuts and bruises and so on is an extremely negative self-portrait. If you were a therapist and a child were to draw this, I mean, you would be very concerned. Well, this boy grew up, and I got a follow-up. A couple of years later, he has 50-50. See, back when the drawing was done, he was living mainly with his dad. But somehow, as court evolved, he ended up in 50-50, and he was doing much better. And a year or so after that, he ends up living with his mom. And she described him as the happiest and healthiest that he'd ever been. So that's interesting. To me, that seems to be a story of resilience and the possibility of improving and surviving parental alienation, because a boy who had this negative feeling gradually got better and became, I guess, what it was described to me as a healthy teenager. So this next part is I'm going to show you progression of one child through several stages. So I think this is my last child, but it's sort of elaborate. I think I have 10 drawings made by the same child. And in the beginning, she's great. She has a good relationship with both parents. She says on her diary here, I love my mom and dad and my whole family. And then she says, me and my sister are BFF, are best friends forever. It's fun to love. I mean, it's a wonderful little tiny essay. And in the picture is herself, and then her mom, and then her dad. And you see the part that's blacked over. Well, for some reason, I think that was her sister in this drawing, and somehow she changed the drawing just to have herself. But in any case, this is a normal 7-year-old child, good relationship with both parents. And this is the same thing, but she's describing here something, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but she's saying, Dad left. He loves me because he left 2 letters. When he comes home, I'm going to jump in his arms and mom's arms. So here she's still very positive, nice relationship with both the mom and the dad. Here's another one. To Daddy from so-and-so. I love you. So then we start seeing a little problem. Now, it's my understanding that when she wrote this note to her mom, she was already starting to become alienated. And it's interesting because she doesn't refer to Dad. She refers to Dad by his name, which is Dean. And then she says, So in this note, she says, hello, dear mommy. Today I'm putting away the dishes and helping Dean. And then she says, me and so-and-so, my sister, are playing. School, not fun. Gotta go. Love you, bye. So she's starting to be negative about Dad's home, not fun here, and missing her mom. So this is the beginning of parental alienation. Now, I mean, if you just saw this, you wouldn't know that. The only way we know that is by the things that happened subsequently, so we're reconstructing the timeline. So then a year later, or about that time, she says, I knew something horrible would be in my life. And that's her name is blocked off down at the bottom. So obviously things are turning not so good. And this was also, I think this is about the same time that, as far as we can tell, she started to have mild parental alienation. So that's what's happening here. And this is, I think, is moderate alienation. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'm going to explain it. See on the right-hand side of the page, it says 4 nights, 3 nights, 2 nights, 1 night. And then she said, Friday, yay. She's counting how many days she has to stay at dad's house before she goes back to her mom's house. So, she obviously is having a negative time. And over here on the other side, it says, when I get home, I will hug mom and give her a great big kiss, and so on. So she's starting to convey negative feelings about one home and positive about the other. And this is, I tried to figure this out, but what it is she's making a plan or a scheme to pretend to be sick in order to go home from daddy's house to mommy's house. And on the left-hand side is the floor plan of her house, which is apparently part of her plan. And she says, I'm sick, fake cough. And then she has a little conversation with her dad. She says, I'm sick. And her dad says, do you want to something? And her mom, she said, no, I want to go to mom's. And daddy says, okay, do you want me to take you? And she says, yay, and so on. So here, this situation is moderate, where she is at dad's house, but much of the time she's negative. And this is more blatant and also moderate. This girl and her sister are saying, me too want to go home. I want to go home, and so on. I miss mom. 8 days is too long to be here with dad. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to severe. And I got to tell you that severe is pretty disturbing. I'm warning you ahead. I'm giving you a heads up. But this girl kept some kind of notebook. And this is something she wrote in her notebook. And this is a story. I'm going to read the whole story. This story is called He and She and the Kids. She had the kids. She gave the kids to him. The kids didn't want to go. He gave the kids back. She had the kids. She gave the kids to he. The next day, he took the kids. And then here's the end. He got shot by a tank. The kids lived happily ever after with she. So that's a pretty dramatic story in which the child is basically has murderous feelings about her dad. And she goes to the trouble, what's kind of fascinating, she goes to the trouble to write this little story to convey her feelings about what's going on. Well, she actually drew a picture about the dad getting shot by a tank. Here it says army people to attack. And then on the other side, there's a tank that's firing a cannon, and then I guess you would call it a armored vehicle or a personnel, vehicle carrying soldiers. And so she draws a picture. She talks about dad being shot by a tank. And she even draws a picture of it. So I've shown you several examples where children have extremely violent, murderous fantasies about killing either their dad or the mother's boyfriend or somebody. So I've given you a number of examples of mild, moderate, and severe alienation, which I think are pretty powerful. I don't want to leave you with this somewhat unhappy feeling. So I want to show you some happy artwork. So here's a little girl who, it's my understanding from her parent that she previously had been an alienated child, and now she's settled down and she's doing okay. And this is a picture, I guess it's a picture of a cow, I think, and a bumblebee. And it's very happy. And this was part of her school, and she won the contest. This picture won the art contest for her class, I guess. And so that's, I mean, I guess it's a good way of showing that even children who previously were alienated later perhaps can turn around. So here's another one, a similar idea. This was a boy who had previously been alienated from a parent. I think he had previously been alienated from his mother, but now he's living with his mother. And at school, there was an assignment to draw a picture of something, of his idea of happiness. And this is in French. I think this is in French Canada. And at the top, it says bonjour and bonheur. So he's saying good day and good luck. And at the bottom, it says island tour, which I think is an actual place where the mom and the boy went and did, were out on a sailboat. It's a really neat picture of a sailboat because it has the sail and it has the ropes and it has the rudder. And it looks like it even has a motor in the back of it, in addition to the sail. And it even has the center board. What's fascinating is this boy has kind of a technical understanding of how sailboats work. And that's the center board down in the bottom. So anyway, this is the same kind of idea that here's a child who previously, the information I had, previously had been alienated, but now he's doing okay. So I just wanted to show you some pictures that are pretty happy. Here's one more happy picture. This child was asked to draw a picture of her family at age 7. And and she is pretty good with paint. And that's her in the center, of course. The child is in the center and it's bigger, and her mom and dad are on either side. And this girl, actually, I tell you, never had been alienated, but this is simply a normal family, which I wanted to leave you with that impression that children can have normal families, which is good to know. So these drawings that I've been telling you are part of this book. This is a new book called Parental Alienation for Families and Practitioners, Q&A, by my friend Alan Blotke and me. And this was only published a couple of months ago. And so what's unusual about this book, it's a book with a lot of practical information about alienation. That's why it's called Q&A, questions and answers. And the book has a number of the pictures that I've just been showing you, plus some others. And so that's very unusual. In other words, I've been collecting these pictures for several years. And finally, we found an opportunity to actually publish some of them. So they're in this book, which I think you can get on Amazon. And I think in India you can, but although I'm not absolutely positive. If any of you, I just want to say this again. I said this already. I'm not using these pictures to diagnose anything. I have, because you have a drawing that's very unhappy. He could have been unhappy from alienation, or he could have been happy simply because of the divorce or for something else. Or the child could be angry for different reasons. So just to really emphasize, these pictures are not diagnostic, but they do help understand the mind, the thinking and feeling of a child who's doing the picture. And if it's an alienated child, you can really see, for instance, you know, the ambivalent, the lack of ambivalence, the splitting, the extreme over affection for one parent and over hatred for the other parent, all of which is diagnostic of alienation, but I don't use these to diagnose alienation. If you want to, if any of you have pictures, you want to participate in that, get in touch with me, and I will, you know, I'd happy to take a look at them. And if we publish something else in the future, I might be able to use them, or I might be able to use them in a presentation. So I think it was mentioned when I was introduced that I was the president. I founded this organization called PASG, which is the Parental Alienation Study Group. And if you're interested, you're welcome to learn more about parental alienation. You can join. It's for free. You just go to www.pasg.info and you can sign up. You know where it says membership. So maybe I'll see you there. So there's one more thing. PASG puts on a big conference every year, except during COVID. And our conference coming up is in Perth, Australia. So of all the places in Earth, Perth is fairly convenient to India. Not perfect, but fairly convenient. And so our conference is coming up in October. The dates are not here, but I think if you simply go to PASG 2026.
11 to 13, Dr. William, the dates.
I'm sorry?
October 11 to 13.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, good. I wanted to make sure you knew about that. So thank you very much. Let me stop the share. There we go.
Before move on to the presentation, I want to share one thing, because the way you showed, many people here, because many psychiatrists are there, they may relate this. Hope is visible, right? I have this I've showed my students. This is a picture of a schizophrenic patient. So as I clearly say that these pictures are used not for diagnosis, but to tell about the severity. So people can know what is happening inside their mind. So we all know about this third-party hallucination and all, auditory hallucination, but this is how we can feel, we can see them doing that. So just want to emphasize that. So what you said was, when you emphasize it is not for diagnosis, it is only for understanding their emotions. That is absolutely true.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's good. Thank you.
Because when you want to tell people that this is what inside the mind, art is a good projection of the mind. So again, excellent presentation, and nobody can teach us better. I'm going to invite Dr. Rao sir to share his views and comments. Sir, you are mute.
So I see some questions. I can look at the chat. So why don't I go down to chat and try to address some of the questions in the next few minutes? Is that okay, Natasha?
Yeah. Yes, it's absolutely fine.
So for instance, here's something that says, does alienation happen always because of the other parent, or are there other factors which influence the child? Well, there can be other factors. Usually it's the mom versus the dad, but sometimes other people get involved, like sometimes grandparents. And for instance, there can be the mom and the maternal grandparents team up to say bad things about the dad. Or occasionally it's the therapist. For some reason, the therapist might form some kind of alliance with a parent, and the therapist and the parent together alienate the child against the other parent. So you have to, if you're doing an evaluation, you have to try to figure out what these different influences are. Yeah, in fact, the very next question. says the same thing. In India, where grandparents are important, many times paternal and maternal grandparents do the alienation. That's absolutely right. So that's interesting. So here's Dr. Kapoor, and he mentions the house tree person drawings. And he says, are there any specific elements that one could use to confirm PA? You know, I don't. Only if the house tree person were absolutely obvious. You know, for instance, if the child draws a house and they draw themselves very happy in the house with a parent, and off in the back is the other parent very unhappy. You know, I suppose I'm not trying to draw inferences, but sometimes if children draw things that are really, really obvious, I think you can make a conclusion. But I don't think I would use it to classify mild, moderate, severe. I mean, we have this really simple method for, you know, I told you mild is one, and you simply base it on how does the child react to visiting the other parent. Just another wrinkle. Those are mild, moderate, severe alienation in the child. You can also classify the alienating behaviors as mild, moderate, and severe. And they don't have to correspond. In other words, it's conceivable that there could be a parent with extremely prolific, severe alienating behaviors, but the child hasn't become alienated or is only mildly alienated. So the level of severity in the ABs might be different than the severity in the PA. And somebody mentions the children apperception test. Oh, how can persistent alienation be treated? Well, and to manage it, well, real quickly, it depends on whether it's mild, moderate, severe. If it's mild, as I described it, the child goes, that you simply tell the parents to shape up. In other words, one parent is saying negative things about the other parent, and the child is catching on. And a therapist, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, or the judge can tell the parents to cut it out, go out of your way to support the child's relationship with both parents. Moderate is more complicated. You have to, they're very difficult cases. You have to have everybody on board. The judge has to order it in a moderate case for everybody to be in some sort of intervention. And typically the mother would have a coach, the dad would have a coach, there would be parenting coordination, there'd probably be counseling for the children. And all these therapists have to be doing the same thing. And all the therapists have to agree on what the goal is. And furthermore, the attorneys need to agree and the judge needs to agree. So in moderate cases, it's really comprehensive and takes a lot of work. Severe cases where the parent is adamant to get rid of the other parent and the child hasn't seen the other parent, we consider that child abuse. In severe cases, we consider causing alienating behaviors is child psychological abuse. And we say the child needs to be removed from that home. So in severe cases, the only way to intervene is for the court to remove the child, at least for a time, from the home of the alienating parent. So I've summarized these real quickly, and all this has been written about, like in the two books we have. The most recent one is called Parental Alienation, Science and Law. It goes into these treatments more in more greater depth. Did children outgrow them? You know, the outcome is there are different possibilities. Some children remain alienated forever. And it's very, very sad because a parent can have an adult child and not see that child for 15 or 20 years. And it's just heartbreaking. On the other hand, sometimes children who have never been treated come around spontaneously. And a typical story is they go away to college. In other words, they get out of the home with the alienating parent, they go away to college, they meet people, they get a girlfriend, and the girlfriend says, "Hey, you're always talking about your mom. What about your dad? Where is he?" And the boy will say, "Hey, that's a good question. What happened to my dad?" And he calls the dad up, and they get together. And I've had the other way. I've had where the dad was the alienating parent, and the kid went away to college, and the kid needed support and called the mother up, and they got together. So occasionally it does happen spontaneously. Oh, it says, was the child artwork collected from their personal drawings? These drawings, the great majority of them were done spontaneously by the children. And they were saved by the parent. So they typically were done at home, or like I said, a couple of them might have been done at school. The only one that was really done in a clinical setting was the one of the boy with the warfare who said, "War is my favorite topic." And that was in a session with me. But most of these are just spontaneous presentations, drawings. Yes, and there's a discussion here of policies that are problematic. It says, is there any time frame? I don't think so. Kids and teenagers and adults, in the book I showed you, one of the paintings is actually by an adult child who was alienated from a parent, and she became a professional artist. So I think the artwork can really be done by children of any age. Then there's something here that says, if the child is 9 or 10 and the child does not know her grandparents, is this classification? Oh, well, once again, I don't use that kind of information to classify it as mild, moderate, or severe. I use that very simple formula for how does the child behave when it's time to visit. But my hunch is that if the child had absolutely no information about their grandparent, that would be in a case of severe alienation. Somebody asked about whether it's not 50-50. So that's, in other words, the percent of alienating and targeted parents. There are different studies. In the one that my colleague, Dr. Larandos, has done here, in which he has looked at more than 1,000 court cases. In his case, most of the alienating parents were mothers and some were fathers, and it was like 3 to 1. Like 75% were mothers and 25% were fathers. There are other studies where it's not, where it's 50-50. And the study that I did, that's exactly, it was exactly 50-50, half and half mothers and half fathers. So I don't think we really know, exactly, but I think the bottom line is it can be either. It can be either the mom or the dad. So I think we only have about a minute or so left here. If there's anything else you think I should mention.
We have few questions which has been asked in the support group, which I would ask you, because this has been termed as a child psychiatric issue. If the child is affected by this kind of an issues, will he be treated by any medications for reversing it?
Oh, as a psychiatrist, are there any medications?
Because there could be element of depression or anxiety. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think if there are other symptoms that the child has, you might be able to use medication. For instance, some children, for instance, have separation anxiety, and that's why they don't want to leave one home and go to the other one. And so certainly if the medication is not specifically for the alienation, the intervention for the alienation is for the parents to change. I mean, the parents have caused the problem and the parents have to change to correct the alienation. But there can be other symptoms. Anxiety is one. Autism is another, is that autistic children sometimes become alienated because they become stuck. And so, you know, there might be some medications that might help reduce the severity of the autism or improve it somewhat. So I think that, so sometimes the other symptoms might be treatable with medication.
And how to establish this diagnosis in the court of law? How to establish this? Who's going to tell them this is mild, moderate, severe alienated child? Who's going to come and testify?
I don't understand. Say it again.
In the court of law, somebody should testify. This is moderately alienated. This is severe. And you people, you recommend the intervention. 50 should be there. Take the child from the custodial parent. You give to the non-custodial parent. Do you tell this to the court?
Yeah.
When you testify.
What I do is I collect information and an evaluation from everybody. And I say, this is all consistent with alienation. Sometimes it's not good to say, I think this is the diagnosis. Some people don't like that word. So sometimes I say consistent. And then I say, look at all this information. This is consistent with severe parental alienation. And then I say, there's been a lot published, and the usual treatment for severe parental alienation is to remove the child from that home, at least for a while. So I don't say, I try to base it on research, because there's been research on how do you separate mild, moderate, severe? How do you diagnose parental alienation, the 5 factors? And what are the interventions? And so I try to explain in court that according to the research, for the intervention, in this case, the child, at least for a while, needs to be removed from this parent.
In that case, do you use the word parental alienation or CAPRT?
You know, it depends on the judge. And most of the times when I testify, the judge is perfectly happy with parental alienation. And some judges don't like it. So in that case, I would describe the behaviors. These are the behaviors of the parent, these which are abusive. These are the behaviors of the child, and we need to protect the child from these behaviors and so on. So look, I think that's about it. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for the questions and the discussion.
Rob, sir, you want to say something, sir, before he leaves?
Thank you so much. I just want to know only one point. Say, for example, those cases which have gone to court and divorce proceedings are happening, issue. But this may be the pathology must have started long back, much before. Can we use this parental alienation syndrome terminology, or something else you suggest?
You know, like I said a minute ago, there are different reasons to use the phrase parental alienation or not use it. And you have to kind of size up the court as to what that court might know. If I know the judge is familiar with alienation, I use it and I say that's what's going on here. I hope that addresses it.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful learning, because this is one of the area, a new concept for at least for we Indians, and this particular problem is going to grow, land up in our table to deal with, and we should be ready to understand all the nuances and the method by which actually we can help these people out. Thank you so much, Dr. Bernet, for the wonderful opportunities also for us to learn. So also all the people who have participated and enriched this program by questions and interaction. Thank you so much. And I thank the organizers for this opportunity for changing this session.
Thank you, sir. I want to request Dr. William one thing. The PCG conference, you need to give special rates for India. The PSG conference in Perth, there is no special rates for the other countries.
Oh,
I'm just
is it?
placing it as a request. Yeah.
Oh, okay. What day
The
is
rates
it?
the rates are quite higher when you're going to see the conversion. So if you're going to
Okay.
give a challenging rates, then we'll be able to see we can attend that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Especially, I'm requesting this will be an invitation through PSC to IPS because we have IPS president here. If you're going to invite the representatives of IPS, these people will be the torchbearers for taking up this concept. Especially, I told CAPRD, child affected with the parental relationship distress. This term they will come to know is going to be a good mutual of exchange of knowledge discussions. So I'm just facing because
Okay.
you are founder president, you might be knowing better. We'll be exchanging this on emails. I'm just giving an open proposal to you because it is coming month of October, and we can have some invitations to the president here. They'll come. There can be board meetings. We can discuss. We can exchange papers because India is facing a lot of these issues recently.
Okay. Yeah.
So we can see India is facing what you face. US, Australia faced 30 years ago. We are following
Yeah.
the trend, and we don't want to end up in kids having these kind of issues, drug issues, abuses. So this is high time. We want to take some responsibilities and we want to take some action here. And main thing is when IPS is involved, it gives a lot of leverage for the lawmakers. IPS is one of the biggest body having a lot of psychiatrists. So when they speak, lawmakers are obliged to listen to that. They are the
Yeah,
one who
that's
going to testify in the court.
Yeah, that's good.
So a small
Thank
request
you.
from our side. Thanks so much, Dr. William. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, sir. Thank you.